Okay, welcome everyone to the 2020 NOVAC webinar series. We've been doing these for better part of a year and a half now, and we think that they've really been very good, and we've had a lot of good response and participation, and we seek to continue doing them. Of course, we stepped them up during the time everyone was spending at home, but as things seem to be opening up now, we may not have one every 10 to 14 days like we have been recently, but we probably will still have at least one a month. So if you have ideas, please let us know at trailhead@nohdcc.org. And if we can, we'll cover your topic. We've been really lucky to have a lot of great guests, and that's true of tonight as well. And you know, most of these guys and gals are doing it on their own time as volunteers. So we just really appreciate the effort they put in to try to get some of this great information out to OHV enthusiasts and land managers, and tonight is no exception. Before I introduce the speaker, a couple things. We ask that everyone stay on mute throughout the presentation. If you want to ask questions at any time, typically in the upper right-hand corner, there's a little quote box or a dialog box. If you click on that, it'll open up a chat function. And if you type your message into everyone there, we will see it. And what we'll do is NOVAC staff will be monitoring that throughout the presentation, and we'll make sure the questions get asked at the end. If there is one we see that comes in that it looks like it makes a lot of sense to interrupt Don and have him answer the question at that time, we'll do that as well. But typically we try to avoid that because we like for the nice clean presentation to go through. As I mentioned, we are recording this, so it seems to play a little bit better if we do that. With that, I want to welcome Don Amador, who will be presenting tonight on a topic that's important to all of us, and that's responding to natural disasters and what he and his colleagues have done with the Post-Wildfire OHV Recovery Alliance out in California. Personally, I've had the opportunity to work with Don for better part of 15 years now in one capacity or another. And I can say that I took over with NOVAC, about 2.5 years ago, maybe 3 years ago, and we finally got Don to be a NOVAC partner, which has been a goal of mine since we got here. So we're proud of him, and he does a lot of really great things. And he always has a lot to share. Most of you know him, but he's a really good ally for anybody who enjoys responsible off-highway vehicle recreation. Encourage everyone to check out his Quiet Warrior Racing website and his blog. It's well-written stuff, timely and always interesting. And if you're looking for something to read related to OHVs, that's a great place to start. So without any further ado, I guess I'll just turn it over to Don and ask that he give us a great presentation like we know he will. So Don?
Hey, thanks a lot, Dwayne. And before I get started, I just wanted to say thanks to NOVAC for letting me be a California rep. I've enjoyed working with NOVAC over the years, and appreciate Dan and Dwayne and Laura and all the folks that work there. And I also wanted to say thanks to the MIC and the Right Rider Action Fund. None of this stuff happens in a vacuum, and without their support, we wouldn't be here tonight. And also wanted to thank AMA for helping get folks out, riders out to some of these volunteer events. And then also thanks to the agency partners and leads, because none of these volunteer projects occur without having quality people there at the agency to help with coordinating volunteers and organizing these projects. Then I also wanted to thank Dale Albright, who helped co-found this organization. He's also a board member and a real good friend. He comes from the fire services, and also, as you know, he's a great recreation lead. So anyway, without further ado, and actually before I get started, as we go through this presentation tonight, the title is Building Capacity to Mitigate Post-Disaster Impacts to Recreation Facilities Through Volunteer and Professional Services. And really, this organization was founded to help build that capacity. So let's think about that as we're going through the presentation tonight. So next slide. So let's review the PWOA mission. The Post-Wildfire OHV Recovery Alliance is a national nonprofit organization founded to protect and restore sustainable OHV recreation from the devastating effects of intense wildfires and other natural disasters. PWOA will collaborate with a diverse array of strategic partners to mobilize volunteers and deploy resources to mitigate post-disaster impacts to recreation areas. Next slide. So our goal, and you see the pictures up at the top, a road closed and then a local grocery store. That kind of helps form our goal, and that is that outdoor recreation is a critical economic driver in many rural areas, as we all know. PWOA will work with various partners in post-fire recovery planning and implementation of management prescriptions that are focused on reopening affected areas in a timely manner so as to avoid prolonged impacts to recreation access and local communities. And both of those, restoring that recreation access and bringing the economic benefit back to local communities, is really important. And I think that these 2018 fires, although we've known that these wildfires impact local economies, I think the size and scope of the 2018 wildfire season in Northern California really drove home the important effect, the negative impact that wildfires and prolonged closures has on local communities. Next. So our mission elements. We represent, as a national organization, a nonprofit organization. We restore and recover and reopen recreation facilities. We protect our cultural and natural resources. And we collaborate and engage a diverse array of stakeholders. Our action items are to mobilize, organize, and train volunteers. We coordinate volunteer response with our agency partners. We provide professional post-disaster mitigation services and deploy resources to mitigate impacts to recreation facilities. Next slide. So why PWOA? And I just give a little history before we get into the bullet points. So the actual seed was planted for the formation of PWOA after the 2013 wildfire, mill fire on the Mendocino. It just totally devastated that recreation facility. And as some of you know, that's a premier recreation forest, not just for OHV, but for non-motorized recreation as well. And so Dale Albright and myself and a few others, we got together and thought of the need to start a wildfire nonprofit. We had meetings with state parks and agencies over the years, but never did really pull the trigger. We knew it was a lot of work, but for one reason or another, we never got it started. But because the 2018 wildfire season was so devastating here in Northern California, actually the largest wildfire that is impacted California in our history, over 450,000 acres on the Mendocino complex, that affected a number of Forest Service and BLM units. And then combined with the Carr fire up in Redding, just really forced us to pull the trigger on getting this thing started. And some of those reasons were to address the reduced agency staff levels. And we all know that the budgets aren't what they used to be. So both Forest Service and BLM, their staff levels are down even under normal circumstances. But during a crisis, a wildfire, some other natural disaster, it becomes even more apparent. Another reason, agency staff are directed to non-recreation post-fire recovery efforts. So their resources are stretched once that disaster occurs. Then also the need to organize and manage volunteers. I think that was another important reason for us starting. Is we got calls while the agency staff were busy trying to address the fire. Volunteers were seeing their recreation facilities destroyed and wanted to help recover those areas, but the agency staff were overwhelmed. And I think one of the key functions that we provided during that 2018 wildfire season was to come in and act as a buffer and take those calls so the agencies weren't getting pounded by phone calls, unnecessary phone calls when they were trying to deal with putting the fire out. So that was an important reason for our establishment. Then second, we want to be able to assist with burned area recovery assessments of recreation facilities. Oftentimes, the recreation specialists are tasked with dealing with more important or higher priority issues. And so oftentimes those recreation facilities don't get addressed in a timely manner. And so our goal is to be able to provide either volunteer or professional recreation services to help expedite those assessments with the thought of getting those areas reopened sooner rather than later. Another thing we want to do is be able to provide professional trail repair services. You know, some of you know we have Cam Lockwood on our board, and we're in the process of getting a master agreement done, which we'll talk about later with Region 5, and with the hope of being able to provide professional trail repair services, tractor training, and also chainsaw classes. And then again, like I said, provide that certified training. So let's go on to the next slide. So as you'll see through this presentation, and we'll kind of wrap up with collaboration, you'll see that collaboration is a key to success. And I think one of the important things that we had to do during the initial organization of the volunteer efforts was to help volunteers understand what collaboration is. Many folks have not participated in collaboration processes, and to help them understand that we were organized to help them. We weren't there to supplant their efforts, but to be there to assist and partner with them. And so the bullet points I wanted to get through tonight are: collaboration is a process of two or more people or organizations working together to complete a task or achieve a goal. And secondly, in its applied sense, a collaboration is a purposeful relationship in which all parties strategically choose to cooperate in order to accomplish a shared outcome. Next slide. So again, PWOA was formed in response to the 2018 Mendocino complex and car fires. Kind of a funny story. I got so many calls from riders saying, "Well, is this a conspiracy?" Because for whatever reason, it always seems, at least in Northern California, that wildfires always take out very popular OHV areas. And I assured him, I said, I don't think it was. And in fact, the fire investigators finally found out what started the Mendocino complex fire, and that was somebody driving steel stakes into the ground. He had bought a canopy to put over his camper, and those sparks from driving a steel stake in the ground started the largest wildfire in California history. And then up the car fire up in the Redding area, I think that was started by a trailer chain being dragged along the ground, sparked up around Whiskeytown Lake. So anyway, we got those areas affected by those fires were the BLM Cow Mountain OHV recreation area, the BLM Chappie Shasta OHV area up near Redding, the Forest Service Upper Lake Ranger District on the Mendocino National Forest, and then the Grindstone Ranger District, that's the Stony Ford OHV area on the Mendocino National Forest. Next slide. So what are the key focus areas for our efforts? Number one is soil stabilization. Some of those prescriptions include installing straw wattles, contour felling, and putting in grade control and water control structures. Felling hazard trees, particularly in those areas where people linger. Then protecting cultural resources. I mean, one of the things that that you notice first off when a fire goes through, oftentimes the vegetation protects cultural resources, but when an intense wildfire goes through, oftentimes you'll see old historic cabins and other things of cultural import are exposed and could be impacted not only from, you know, people taking stuff, but also heavy winter rains and stuff could come and wash those cultural resources away. So again, important to stabilize the soil. Then of course the recreation facilities. Those are signs that are burned up and destroyed. We've got those trails, we'll talk about those later, barriers, and then of course hundreds if not thousands of downed trees across trails and roads. Next slide. So what were some of our challenges from the ranch fire? Some of those were exposed rebar from damaged delineators along trails and campgrounds, roads, and also protecting sensitive areas. Again, thousands of downed trees across trails. We have washed out roads and blown out culverts. Again, hazard trees, particularly where people linger. Damaged signs. Again, cultural resources exposed. And then sensitive habitat areas exposed. Oftentimes, those barriers or natural vegetation that protected those sensitive areas, they're now gone. And those sensitive areas are exposed. Next slide. So here's a good example of a campground with exposed rebar. Of course, it's an obvious safety hazard. We can't let people go back in there with that, those bars sticking up out of the ground. So one of the things that we have to do first off is go in and pull up the rebar and remove the damaged, severely damaged barriers. And one of the things too that the exposed rebar does, it forces the agency and recreation partners to assess, do we really want to keep using these man-made barriers and delineators when we're in a, you know, climate change? We've got drier climates. We're seeing wildfires now coming through instead of every 10 or 20 years, they're coming through every 5, 6, 7 years. So we're sort of in a squirrel cage where we place structures, and then a few years later they get burned up, and then we have to do it again and again and again. So the question is, maybe not in a developed site like a campsite, but particularly when we're out along trails, the question is, can we use natural barriers such as downed trees to help delineate the trails or delineate those trail entrances or act as used for protection of sensitive areas? I think those are all legitimate, important questions that we need to consider when rebuilding after a fire. Next slide. So here we go. This is a good slide of sort of telling a story of the short time periods between fires. So these big trees that are down across this trail, most of those were damaged in the 2013 mill fire. So when the 2018 ranch fire came through, that was just kind of the straw that broke the camel's back. So these trees that are already weakened are now falling down across the trails, along with trees that were damaged by the fire. So anyway, just an example of some of the things, the maintenance and post-fire recovery efforts that are complicated now by these more frequently occurring wildfires. Next slide. So here we have washed out roads and trails. This is a really good example. This is a popular OHV route on the Mendocino where a culvert was installed. So what happens when a fire goes through, you have woody debris and soil that's no longer held in place by vegetation. And when the fires, after the fire's out, a lot of times even in the late summer, you'll get gully washers or downpours, and those can plug up those culverts and overrun the culvert, and then you end up with a washed out road. And then also too, during the winter, on these large fires where the resources may not be there to go out and do these immediate repairs, these things will degrade over the winter. So a lot of work needs to be done, and helping build that capacity to address that is one of the reasons we're here. Next slide. So here you have a picture of a burned out stump. Now, it doesn't look that bad because it's alongside of the road, but what happens when that's in the road? When you have huge root systems that go out through the road, and they can collapse when a vehicle runs over it, or particularly in a trail. That can be a rather rude experience when you're traveling on a road or a trail and your front wheel goes down into a 4-foot hole, burned out stump, or a burned out root. So these are just some of the things that need to be repaired, filled up, or somehow otherwise mitigated after a fire. A huge safety hazard. Next slide. So this is you may not see it that clearly, but you'll notice in the middle of the slide, there's some wheel tracks going out through this meadow. This is a subalpine meadow on the Mendocino that's where no vehicle access is allowed. But what happened is when the fire went through, it burned out the post and cable barriers. So this has probably occurred during hunting season. So people went out through the meadow and staged, set up camp in that tree clump back to the right. So this was actually one of our PWOA restoration projects, and I've got some pictures later on. But this just shows what can happen to protected areas when those trail delineators or barriers are destroyed. And a lot of times this happens during hunting season. Next slide. So again, here's some pictures of hazard trees along a road here, and then there's some trails. Again, just where people linger, just can create a lot of issues, particularly safety issues on roads and trails and campgrounds. So again, helping get that addressed is going to be one of our objectives. Next slide. So post-fire recovery, what are some of the things that we do? Important, again, to go out and survey the damage, record where those washouts are, where trees are down, and where natural resource or cultural areas may be impacted. We repair and replace delineators and barriers along roads, trails, and protected areas. Again, remove down trees, install new signing, repair and replace fence posts, and repair and reconstruct damaged trails. Next slide. So here's a picture of actually that campground that I showed you before with the exposed rebar. Here, one of our volunteer crews is replacing those campground delineators using DeWalt impact hammer, pounding down that rebar to stick them in the ground. And I don't know how many of you guys have used sledgehammers trying to pound that stuff in, but let me recommend those electric power hammers. All you need is a small generator to power those, and man, you can get a lot of work done with one of those. So got this campground is now open for the public, which is good news. It looks really good. And our volunteer crew did a real good job on getting this buttoned up and so it can be reopened to the public. Next slide. And this is actually some work that I was doing on the 2013 mill fire with some Forest Service staff. This is one of the main transport routes on the Mendocino. These barriers had been burned up, so here we are putting barriers along a sensitive area along the bank of the road. Next slide. Yeah, next slide. So here, again, most of you know we have to do a lot of clearing of down trees, but this particular photo is important because a lot of forests, and again, we're talking about building capacity. I think this shows the important role that volunteer dirt bike strike teams can have in getting out and getting a lot of trails cleared. Not all forests have dirt bike qualified riders or even ATV, with a lot of them switching to side by side, or a lot of agency staff don't use any of the OHVs we have. And so without volunteer dirt bike strike teams to go out and get some of this done. This project here, we had 2 dirt bike strike teams out on the forest that weekend, and I think we cleared about 45, 50 miles of routes. Got, I think 250, 300 trees cleared out. So anyway, this is just an example of the important role that the dirt bike strike teams can play. So go ahead, next slide. Here we have another example of a team effort. You've got agency outdoor rec staff running the dozer. You've got a volunteer dirt bike swamper to go out and clear down trees ahead of the dozer. And here the dozer's putting back in those soil erosion control structures that we had talked about earlier. Again, this is a huge team effort. Having those volunteer strike teams go out and assist agency staff when they have that staff available is key. Next slide. So here's that post and cable that was along the perimeter of that meadow I showed you earlier. Picture to the left, you can see the burnout poles, the cables down on the ground. And on the slide to the right, you'll see the new poles installed, new cable threaded through. And I was just up at this area a week or so ago, and proud to say that particular project is meeting its objective of protecting the area. Didn't see a single vehicle trespass in the area, and very proud of the work that our team did up there. Again, protecting these sensitive areas. Without that volunteer capacity, without that volunteer support, this might not have gotten done this year. It might have had to wait till a later time. So again, getting out quickly, getting these projects done is important. Next slide. So dozer lines. One of the things out here in the West, dozer lines are a popular initial attack tool to manage the fire. On the Mendocino fire, the ranch fire, they had put in over 400 miles of dozer lines. Although these pictures are up on the Carr fire, they had several hundred of miles put up there on that. Oftentimes the dozer operators, and this raises the question about the efficacy of dozer lines today. That's dozer lines are 80, 90-year-old strategy. And after the fires were over, there were quite a few discussions about whether dozer lines are the appropriate tool in all circumstances. Are there better ways to manage a fire? And so you'll see the picture on the bottom right. That used to be a four-wheel drive side-by-side route. Now you can see it's 150 feet wide. And so trying to reestablish that trail footprint, it just raises a lot of questions. You'll see barriers up on the upper left, putting those barriers across those dozer lines, because to a rider, without those signs and barriers, that looks like a trail. So important to get back out and put those delineators and signs back out on the dozer lines as quick as possible. And you'll see on the upper right, a trail temporary close sign. That was put in because one of these dozer lines went right down through the middle of a premier single track trail. This is a motorcycle trail that was almost completely obliterated with a huge dozer line. And so, you know, it just raises questions. Are they necessary? I think that debate needs to continue. Not sure that they're appropriate in every circumstance. Next slide. So here's a couple slides on the Mendocino on the left. See a big dozer going down. This is a major transportation OHV route for four-wheel drives and side-by-sides and smaller OHVs. So there's some heavy equipment coming in and doing that. And then the photo on the right, this is a rebuilt, reconstructed rolling dip with a water sediment catch basin, catch basin on the left. And again, these are important mitigation tools, but then also putting them back in after fire can be difficult because the soil moisture is not there. So a lot of times you're pushing dry dirt. You sometimes wonder how effective that is, but then you've got winter rains coming. So there's all kinds of management questions that, you know, that we face that agency has to answer. But I just brought these up to show you some of the things that we do after the post-fire mitigate damage to the trails. Next slide. So installing new signs. This again is that meadow area. One of the things we did after installing those posts and cable was installing signs. And one thing that I've noticed is that you almost need the sign and the barrier to go together. Of course, you don't need signs everywhere, but on sensitive areas where you don't want vehicles traveling, you've got cultural resources or whatever to protect, you know, why not consider putting in a sign or two to reinforce the reason why that barrier is there. I've seen riders go up to these things with not really realizing that they're not supposed to be there, and maybe having that sign there increases the efficacy of the objective of that barrier. So anyway, next slide. So here we go, photo on the left. This is some installing trail delineators on the Upper Lake Ranger District. We've got joint effort between volunteers, we've got agency rec leads out there, and we also have the Forest Service LE. Fortunate on the Upper Lake side, we've got great LE staff there, and on the Mendocino, they often come out and help with these recovery efforts. They actually come out and pound signs with all their gear on. So really cool to have them come out and help get the area recovered and reopened. Then the photo on the right, this is a historic hunting route that was closed during travel management, but many of the local hunters remember that as a hunting route. So getting back in there with, here's a peeler core fence and some signing to let them know that this route is not open for their use. If we don't do that, that just becomes a big road again, and then you have to rehab that, etc. So again, important to get back out and put those trail delineators and barriers and signing back in. Next slide. So certified training, you know, I was just on a National Chainsaw call today with Pete Duncan and Jennifer Tripp from PCTA and some others, and we talked a lot about capacity, and you know, particularly now with COVID, hasn't been a lot of training going on. Actually, hasn't been a lot of volunteer work going on, and so we always have this need to train, in this case, non-agency recreation staff and volunteers to be able to go out and buck and do some light duty felling, and also got the trail tractors equipment on the right. There's just a huge need nationwide to increase that capacity for both chainsaw and trail equipment. So that's, you know, really one of the things that PWOA wants to bring to the equation, besides helping organize those volunteers, is to provide that certified training capacity to help build that workforce. Next slide. So again, organizing volunteers. You know, these are takes a lot of work to put one of these together, as most of you know. But fortunately, out here in California, both Forest Service and BLM got a lot of great staff there. These are collaborative efforts. This particular effort, we work with the Forest Service, their volunteer coordinator, Paige. And so we use the agency volunteer agreements. We helped kind of organize it and facilitate it. But this was a huge partnership between the Forest Service and the volunteers, and got a huge amount of work done this weekend. So again, these are oftentimes all hands on deck, and we just want to be part of those hands helping to recover and reopen these areas. Next slide. So here again, working with our agency partners, you know, and I just can't say enough that how important it is. The agency volunteer coordinators and outdoor rec planners, we have both Forest Service and BLM in these pictures. These events just simply would not happen without, you know, what I call the access stars, the recovery stars, the rec stars that are on many units. You know, I often say that the quality of a recreation program is directly proportional to the quality of the rec staff helping to keep these areas managed and open. So this is just a tribute to both BLM and Forest Service for the work they do out here in Region 5, and the California BLM just do such a great job. And wouldn't have got these areas open without this joint effort between volunteers and the agency. Just a huge team effort. Very proud to have be part of that. And that's one of the kind of the most rewarding things about working on this volunteer effort. Next slide. So we can just spend a couple minutes here. I'll read through this Forest Service Master Agreement. This is a project that PWOA has been working with Region 5 on. You know, give a lot of credit to Kathy Mick and Garrett and the rest of the R5 rec team for helping get this organized and put together. You know, we're getting real close to getting it signed. So I'll just go ahead and read through this, and maybe we can have a short discussion after we're done with this particular slide. So PWOA is in the final phase of getting a signed master agreement with the U.S. Forest Service Region 5, which is located in Vallejo, California. The master agreement will formalize a cooperative partnership between PWOA and the Forest Service so that it can mobilize, train, and manage a workforce of specialists, consultants, and volunteers. Those resources will be deployed to mitigate post-disaster impacts that occur on national forest recreation facilities. Recovery projects may include cultural and heritage site protection, bridge and culvert replacement, hazard tree abatement, reconstruction of trails and water control structures, installation of barriers, and sign replacement. And then under guidance from the master agreement, PWOA will enter into supplemental project agreements with individual forests to offer certified training for both agency and non-agency personnel and volunteers in the following disciplines: the MTDC chainsaw training course for non-fire purposes, basic training for the Sutter and Sweco trail tractors and mini excavators. And PWOA looks forward to working with our civilian, agency, and industry partners as we grow both our professional and volunteer workforce to assist in recreation recovery efforts, both during and after the wildfire and other natural disasters. So Dwayne, you want to just keep going, then we'll do Q&A at the end.
Sorry, struggling to get off mute. Yeah, let's keep going. And it looks like we're getting a question.
Okay.
Why don't we finish up and then we'll get to everything.
Yeah, sounds good. Okay, next slide. So again, we talked about collaboration at the beginning, and here as we start to close up, again, collaboration with the volunteers, with the agency, the team effort approach to recover and reopen recreation facilities is just so critical. I just can't state that strongly enough. And This particular picture is a good example where this was a joint partnership with Forest Service and BLM, did a joint news release. We actually had non-motorized volunteers come out for this particular work project where we did that Summit Valley restoration effort. And just a real privilege to work with these great guys and agency staff, very rewarding. Next slide. Then, of course, it's always important to celebrate our victories. You know, sometimes we talk about all the battles we fight and challenges, but I don't think we spend enough time celebrating some of our victories and hard-fought efforts. So this is just a picture of a celebration we had up at Cal Mountain to celebrate the reopening. And this particular picture, the gate reopening on June 13, we had agency staff and some key volunteers helping reopen that gate. You know, sort of like, you know, move that bus. You know, we were saying, you know, open that gate. It was just a lot of fun. So, you know, we can't forget to not to celebrate those great events. Next slide. So again, here's just some of the partners that we had over on the Mendocino. We have Farscape Mendocino Collaborative, Oakland Motorcycle Club, had Overland Bound. That's an adventure, backcountry adventure overlander group. Couldn't have done it without them. Of course, our organization, Forest Service, White Warrior Racing, and our strike team, Bikes and Chainsaws, District 36, Cal 4-Wheel Drive, Nevada County Woods Riders, and the Marin County Motorcycle Association. Again, you know, it takes a lot of people to make these things come off, but just wanted to give them some kudos. Next slide. And then I just wanted to take a moment as we wrap up to, you know, let us remember that there's a human cost to these fires. You know, almost every fire that occurs, you know, somebody gets killed or severely injured, sometimes maimed for life. This particular memorial on the Mendocino it's a famous fire where a number of firefighters got killed, both including a number of Native Americans. And so this is the memorial is here. I try to stop in when I'm up there from time to time and spend a few minutes. Most of the time, nobody's there, just to stop and remember that there's a human cost, not only to firefighters, but you know, people oftentimes die in fires, particularly some of these big ones. So it's not just about recreation access, although that's important. There's a human cost, and I just think it's important to remember that. Next slide. And then, of course, fun stuff. I mentioned earlier about industry support. Couldn't do it without industry support, like I said, from MIC and Rider Access Fund, Yamaha. This particular grant is for a trailer. We haven't got it outfitted or decaled yet, thanks to COVID. But Polaris and some others have grants that help support trail stewardship efforts, and in this case, helping us get off the ground with our wildfire rapid response trailer project. So we'll keep you updated on that as we continue to build that out. And here we go. Questions?
Don, thank you. You didn't disappoint. I at least anticipated a great presentation, and you stepped up, and really a lot there to learn about. I have a couple things I'd like to cover. First, sure. There was a conversation going on the side here between Garrett and Dell about how all of the workers you had out there and the volunteers were wearing hard hats and other PPE, and everybody who knows me or knows Novak knows that we're committed to wearing the appropriate gear both when we're riding and when we're working. So I wanted to call that out and highlight that, because safety and wearing the gear is always important, even when you're out on the trail working. Make sure you do it safely.
Sure. Yeah.
Go ahead.
You sure, and that's always one of the things when you're running one of these programs. It's easy for volunteers to forget about they're not wearing their PPE. So as a trail boss or project lead, that's besides, you know, making sure that the materials are there, often pre-staged, make sure that the proper PPE is there, and that we're reminding people to wear them as appropriate, always key. And then as we work through the COVID stuff, I'm sure we're going to have some COVID mitigation tools available as we go back out on the forest and public lands for volunteer projects.
Yeah, great point. Always take all the right precautions, and we all love OHV recreation and other forms of recreations on public and private lands, but safety first is always a good way to go. I want to say we have an embarrassment of riches because we have our most recent webinar presenter from a couple of weeks ago, Chris Reel with TPS Technical, on as well. And he had sent over a couple emails to me about some of the work he saw that PWOA had done. And I wonder, Chris, if you take yourself off mute and give us maybe just 30 seconds or a minute about your feelings about PWOA and the kind of work that they've done.
Hello, can you hear me?
Got you, Chris.
Yeah, being an off-road enthusiast and seeing the devastation that occurs, it's so important that we as a group take a look at what we can do to help solve the problem and build our areas back with teamwork. And so, I'm from Southern California. It burns down on a regular basis, and it's and our forest here really benefits from trail stewards and volunteers working with agencies. And what Don and his group up in Northern California and Nevada have done is really amazing, because not only does it help the get the areas reopened, but the benefit to the local economies is just it's amazing how much benefit it has. So I have to give it up to Don for the long vision on starting the organization and pulling in resources to help address the challenge. And quite honestly, it's going to be a challenge that's going to be with us a long time, because forest fires happen, and wildfire destruction, we need to recover from it.
Awesome.
So Chris, I just wanted to comment. Dell and I have talked about this. If we knew how much work it was to get one of these nonprofits off the ground, I don't know if we would have started it. But we're committed to make it work, and really looking forward to it. But there is a lot of work, and it's really a long game. It takes a long time, as you know, to put one of these things together. A lot of things to deal with, logistics and all sort of corporate stuff, and it's I think it's going to be well worth the effort.
Awesome, thank you. Before we get into a discussion about the master agreement, I did want to cover this question from Roger, and he says that some agencies in New Mexico are afraid to let us back out there after a fire. They think we started the fire and have no business trying to help. Have you experienced that? Are there ways to get in on the ground there? Is it helpful to start off in non-OHV areas to show the kind of work you can do? Are there ways around that, or to change those relationships?
Well, so yeah, no, I've seen it here in California, and as you know, it varies from forest to forest and field office to field office. And I don't have a really good answer, except that try to, if you have a unit that wants to work with a volunteer program, and volunteer programs take a lot of work. Let's not kid ourselves. It's a huge commitment on the part of the agency to run a volunteer program. Many of them don't have the staff. Sometimes they don't have the inclination. Maybe their priorities are timber or something else that they're just not focused on that. And so, look for those Forest Service or BLM units that have, geared up to work with volunteer programs and volunteers, and see if you can build some success stories with those units.
Yeah, good thought. If you can prove on another unit that you've done a great job, might put too much pressure on the other units to not let you in.
Right. I mean, for those of us on the call, we're used to volunteer efforts, but it's been my experience that a lot of agency line officers, they may not have that experience with volunteers. And so it's maybe not that they don't like them, it's just that they don't know anything about them.
Absolutely true. And also, there's been a conversation going on in the chat feature about the master agreement. But one of Novak's webinar rock stars, Christopher Johnson, asked the question, did Region 5 receive agency direction to enter into the master agreement, or did they do it on their own initiative?
Well, I mean, I think it was their own initiative. Region 5 has a long history of supporting recreation and volunteerism. I mean, I think they've always been at the forefront of supporting both motorized and non-motorized recreation and volunteer partnerships. So, you know, maybe Garrett or Kathy, if they're on, has another viewpoint, but it's my experience that this came from Region 5 because of their long history and commitment to working with recreation partners.
Yeah,
Right.
this is I can maybe add some context if it's helpful for folks, and I'm looking at the chat box too and kind of seeing the conversation. And I, you know, I mean,
Garrett, would you introduce yourself and your role so that we know?
Sure. Yeah, I guess there's a lot of people I know on this call, but I'm Garrett Villanueva. I'm the Region 5 Forest Service Trail and Travel Management Program Manager. And Region 5 is more or less the state of California, which is really unique. Most regions encompass multiple states. And there is a conversation going on about Region 3. You know, I don't represent Region 3, but I do represent the Forest Service. So I can perhaps provide a little bit of insight that might be helpful to you all. And the reason, so yeah, we definitely took initiative to work on this agreement and set aside time. Multiple staffs have worked on it with everyone at PWOA, who's put a lot of effort into it as well. And I think that's the magic, is that we're all working on it together, trying to come up with an agreement that we think is going to be successful. And PWOA has done a really good job of understanding the agency policies, the laws we have to follow, our regulations, being patient at certain times, but pressing at the right times. So we have a lot of trust, and that goes to PWOA's professionalism. It's easy to trust PWOA because they are consistently demonstrating how professional you guys are. Not that other groups aren't, but PWOA has done that really exceptionally. Working with the Forest Service, it's important to understand the hierarchy of decision making that occurs. So at the end of the day, if you want to get something done on a specific trail, you know, the big boss, as Del put it, in that case would be the district ranger, would be the first big boss that you'd want to be working with and demonstrating to that big boss that you are supporting their efforts and essentially making decisions to work with partners and volunteers, low risk and easy to say yes by developing trust. That's what it, to me, that's what it's all about. And an easy way to start building trust is to understand the local agency needs. And I know that might be a tough pill to swallow sometimes, but that's kind of part of the reality, because we are the agency as a whole is capacity constrained, especially in recreation.
Awesome. Thank you for jumping in there. That's great. Great content. And want to move on just a little bit. We have a few more questions and only a couple minutes, so I want to get this out of here on time if at all possible. But one that I wanted to address, which I'm scrolling and looking for now, was from Mitchell Simmons, and I want to address it from Novak's perspective. Del addressed it a bit in the comments from PWOA's perspective, but that he said it seems like this presentation was primarily California centric, and he's in Arizona, And he asked, are there volunteer post-fire opportunities in his own state? And the short answer to that is, I don't frankly know. I suspect not, like has been established before. However, Novak's role in promoting this presentation, as it always is with all the webinars and presentations we do at conferences, this is something that we believe can be replicated. And the great thing about it is people like Don and Dell and Nick Harris and others who have had involvement in PWOA or similar activities are completely willing to talk you through how they got that process off the ground, what it took, what it might take for you, how it might look if you wanted to implement something similar. Sounds like Dell believes there may be an opportunity to have PWOA involved in Arizona, and that's great. If there's a state where PWOA can't be involved, Novak wants to promote the ideas that we present and that PWOA has brought before us, and that they can be replicated with your own efforts. With that, I'll turn it over to Don in case he has any comments on that as well.
Yeah, I just wanted to comment on a couple things. First, Garrett, it is a trust issue, and that without trust between the agency and the organizations, stuff like this ain't going to happen. I mean, it takes a huge amount of effort on both parts to make sure that you respect the relationship, respect each other's constraints, and keep your word. Make sure you follow all the protocols, safety protocols, etc. Because it's all about relationships and trust at the end of the day. It's built over 10, 20, 30 years. It doesn't happen in a vacuum. It doesn't happen overnight. You have to make a commitment to do this. Founded as a national organization, but we wanted to set a template and an example to inspire other nonprofits, whether it's at the state level or local level. I'm actually going up next week to Northern California to help get a trail, OHV trail nonprofit started to where they can do similar activities on their own forest. So we're trying to lead by example, trying to create templates and success stories that others can build on.
Awesome. Thank you, Don. And with that, we're going to start wrapping up. We're at 59 minutes right now, and we try to get people out of here on time. So I just want to say, really appreciate you taking the time to do this. And Laura, if you would advance it to the next slide, please. I think what you'll see there, and we'll give this a couple minutes, that's how you can reach Don. And Don knows most of you and most everybody in the OHV community. So if there's some way he can help, I'm sure he'll be delighted to do it. If he can't, he can get you in touch with the right people. You can also always reach out to Novak staff at trailhead@nohvcc.org. It's all over our website, so visit that and take a look, and you can get in touch with us. We can get in touch with them. If you have questions unrelated to tonight's presentation, but about OHV use, you can reach out as well. But the idea with all these webinars is to start a conversation, and if there's no reason to reinvent wheels, and what Don, Dell, and others have done out there in California has done a lot of the heavy lifting, or at least blazed the trail, so to speak, so that others can follow. And we're always proud of them and understand they're doing great work. And Chris shared with me some of the pictures, and of course the pictures we saw today. They're doing a fantastic job. So thank you for the work you do, and thank you, Don, for being on this presentation and being willing to do this and to put up your email like this so that anybody can get in touch with you. It's really helpful. It goes a long way. I'm going to ask Don to wrap up here in a second, but first I would ask Dan Clean, who is Novak's chairman and president, if he wanted to go off mute and say a few words before we formally close this. Okay, maybe Dan is not in an area where he can talk or get off mute, but that's okay. Thank you, Don. We'll give you a chance to close here, and then we'll wrap up.
Yeah, I just wanted to thank everybody for coming on. Like I said, I know a lot of you people, and this is not a one-man show. This would not happen if it wasn't for the team we have. Dale Albright. We've got other partners like Ken Reynolds, and a lot of fire professionals helping us. Our board members. We're just looking forward to helping build capacity with the Forest Service and BLM to get out there and address wildfire and other natural disasters and recover and reopen areas that are damaged by those events.
Great. Thanks again, Don, and thanks to everybody who participated. Saw a lot of repeat customers, so to speak, and a few new names, so that's fantastic. We will continue our webinar series, as I mentioned at the beginning. So keep an eye out on our website and see what's coming up and participate if you can. The recorded versions will be put on our website, usually within 48 hours or so. So you can view this one or any of the other ones if you happen to miss them in a couple of days here. I just really want to give a thank you to everyone, and make sure you're visiting our website, involving yourself in the conversation. If you have ideas about what you'd like to see this webinar series cover, let us know at that trailhead@nohbcc.org email. If you have any other suggestions or ideas, we'd love to hear from you, and hope to continue to serve you with these webinars and all the other ways that NOVAC does our thing. So with that, thank you everyone, and good night. And Laura, if you'd hit the end record, I'd appreciate it. Thank you.
Okay, thanks guys.